Chapter 1. The miles drifted past my windshield as the rumbling sound of the engine played background to the radio's soft country twang. I was lulled into a spiritual state as the sounds lured me down forgotten memory lanes. The motorhome steadily ate up the warm black asphalt as I traveled on this long-anticipated journey. My mind hesitantly took one of those exits on memory lane, and I drifted to a long, hot summer day when I was forced to say goodbye to my beloved husband, Jack. His time on this earth was nearly over, but he wanted to go out with his boots on, so determined he was not to be weak. He broke my tortured heart as he struggled to rise, trying to overcome his weakness. Frustrated, he spoke my name like a mantra, hoping I could help. I cried inside. I had never cried in front of him since the day he was diagnosed. That day we were both raw with fear and stripped of hope, and he hot with anger. Jack lashed and lunged at the cancer's grip that limited his time and the air that he breathed, and I was in the way. I sobbed at his attack, knowing his emotional wounds had to be excruciating. Tears flooded my face and poured into his heart. His heart, already full of his pain, could not handle mine too. As he begged me not to cry, he wrapped his arms, that would always be strong for me, and cradled me for one last time. From that day forward I cried alone. I lost my best friend that day. The loneliness seared my brain and stopped my heart. Jack had a battle to fight. He had no time for my fears, my hurts. I was on my own. Not until that day did I realize that the bond of togetherness, partnership, and devotion, which I had foolishly ignored, was now lost to me forever. How could I go on? How could I possibly hold it together? How could I let him go? How would I tell him it was okay to go? Oh God, how could I do this? The chemo and radiation months passed with our emotions still raw, but bandaged tightly. He remained the strongest man I ever knew, and I continued to do what I thought was impossible. I dealt with it. We were both struggling souls trying to fit into a world we didn't always understand. I had grown strong over the years by fighting his will to control and dominate. He grew loving and tender as he tempered his fears and angers. We needed each other's weaknesses if we were to grow. I had grown strong enough to let go, and he had grown strong enough in his love to soar to the heavens. I couldn't help him on his last journey, but I lay beside him, breathing in his spirit for the last time. He passed, soaring peacefully to some unknown realm. His last breath seemed like my last too. It was as if a knife had just sliced us apart. But just past the piercing pain, it became like a clear day to me, and I could see forever as I began to understand everything. Our difficulties had molded us and shaped us into this entity that would always be one, even in goodbye. It had been only 4 months since that hot August afternoon when I had to say goodbye to my best friend of 25 years. Jack had come onto this earth with the fireworks on the 4th of July, and now, as a rare summer thunderstorm performed a grand finale for his exit, he began his new journey, free of pain. And so my lonely pain and widowhood began. He was done now, and so was I. He wasn't coming back. I grabbed the walker that parked now, unneeded, at the foot of the bed. I ran down the hall to the garage and hurled it into the empty space where his Harley had been. It landed with a loud metal clamor that was not loud enough for me. I grabbed an empty box from the garage and stormed back into the house. I yanked open the medicine cabinet door. I shoved countless prescription bottles off their shelves and clattering into the box. Still not loud enough. I dragged every last piece of medical equipment, screeching across the tiled floor, and tossed each one, the walker, the nebulizer, the bedside urinal into the pile in the garage. It was all dead to me. Everything lay scattered on the garage floor in the empty space where his beloved Harley had been parked. I wanted to see no more illness. I wanted to take a sledgehammer to all the hateful reminders. I wanted to be done with it. I just wanted to remember him. To remember us, before the monster had sprung on us. I wanted to go back to the joking, teasing times, the quiet oneness times. During those darkest days of his illness, a seed was sown in my imagination of a better place, a place to escape the pain and sorrow. I began to travel in my mind. First, it was a local camping trip, sitting in the shade of a California oak, while inhaling the sweet scent of lush green grass with a warm spring breeze whispering in my ear. As I endured those never-ending, agonizing days of grief, the seed began to sprout. The California oak became an Arizona saguaro, and then a Florida cypress, dripping with Spanish moss. My imagination took me roaming across the country, where I was humbled by majestic vistas and felt the reverence of historic landmarks. The seed pushed its way up through those hopeless days as Jack traveled his own lonely road, bringing him closer and closer to his journey's end, and me to my journey's beginning. The dream that I had nurtured safely in the confines of illness and responsibilities now began to take command. The vision of driving across this great country after he was gone, experiencing its history and feeling the heartbeat of its people, was always in my mind's sight. Even in sleep, the vision would appear, unwilling to be ignored. But dreams don't just spring into reality, like the pop-up on a child's birthday card. They take planning and a lot of courage. I knew how to plan, but where would I get courage? The Wizard of Oz was nowhere in sight. My courage came disguised as a Winnebago that we had purchased a few years before Jack's illness. 24 feet was considered small in RV circles, but to me it was long enough. Winnebago made several models. Eerily, the one we had chosen was called Spirit. Sweeping lines of purples and blues graced the white wide body outside, and a large Harley-Davidson sticker on the rear window announced the partiality of a now ghostwriter. 2 beefy wheels in front and dualies, as they are called, in the rear carried this home that would be the bravado for my courage, my woman cave. When I drove this big rig, I grew several inches and became buff. I was now the shadowy image who looked down from the darkened cab into your car's passenger window. I was the envy of all who dreamt my dream. The hugeness of the motorhome's appearance to the outside world ended when you entered. All the comforts of home existed in scaled-down versions. A tiny kitchen with a tinier sink. Microwave, stove, oven, and refrigerator was just big enough to be adequate. The limited space in the bathroom had a shower that was big enough to stand in, but difficult to move around in. And the toilet was the right size to start the job, but limited space made it awkward to finish. The snug bed, framed by large windows, gave a 180-degree view of the nighttime starlight shows. And finally the living room, decorated in mauves and mochas, allowed me to either enjoy the scenic view out the tinted picture window or relax to my favorite TV show or movie on the high-def flat screen. Life could be very good on the road. Any journey begins with one step. For me it was 1 mile. The cushioned armrests wrapped around me as I sank into the driver's seat. With sweaty hands and a thumping pulse, I felt every inch and pound of fiberglass and metal weighing on my shoulders. My shaky foot stepped on the gas, and slowly, very slowly, I crept away from the curb, heading for practice destinations of nearby campgrounds that Jack and I had frequented. With heavy heart and fond memories at each campground, I sprinkled Jack's ashes at our favorite spots. I remembered the good times and the bad times, and cried. Then I would vow my love to him, falling down on my knees and begging God to somehow give me just one more day with him. I became more and more comfortable with driving, backing in, hooking up, and unhooking. Very important, too. And I became more familiar with my new painful passenger called loneliness. Necessity was the mother of invention, and that was how Jack became reincarnated. Watching the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, I had become inspired by his relationship with the volleyball, Wilson. Out of desperation and loneliness, I too created a companion. Sewing feverishly and stuffing a cloth body, arms, and legs, gluing plastic eyes, and hanks of wig hair, I created a life-sized doll that looked amazingly real. Jack was a Harley man to the core. If you did not own a Harley, or at least lust for one, you were not of much interest to him. Jack's reincarnation began with Harley boots on the feet, while the fabric head sprouted just enough hair for a ponytail secured by a rawhide tie. A Harley earring dangled from the correct ear and, of course, a Harley t-shirt announcing "Harley Rules" fit snugly over his polyester chest. Topping his bald head was, of course, a Harley hat, while dark glasses shaded the glued-on buggy blue eyes. A gaudy ring and an imitation gold-encrusted watch wrapped his finger and wrist. I was now no longer alone. Jack incarnated was riding shotgun. Although I was never a cat lover, a cat indeed became the next addition to my traveling family. Sportster arrived at my doorstep looking for a home. Moved by the belief that if an animal was born after the death of a loved one, a piece of that loved one's soul could be transferred into the newborn soul, I took him in. Wanting to be a responsible pet owner, I needed to establish Sportster's birth date for future celebrations. The vet determined the little guy to be 6 weeks old. I got chills when I discovered that, counting back exactly 6 weeks from his arrival date, his birthday was my birthday. Any doubts I had about keeping the cat vanished. Had I known that this little spirit was born that day, with his destiny to enhance my stark life, I would not have wept on my first birthday alone. I would have rejoiced instead. I was now a cat lover. Was part of Jack reincarnated into this little soul? Jack had always been uncomfortable with displays of affection. Although I knew he welcomed my kisses, he would always pooh-pooh them with a cavalier attitude. Sportster sat on the high back of my recliner as I brought my face near to kiss his small pink nose. The nearer my lips became to his nose, the further his head leaned back, until, losing his balance, he fell to the floor, albeit gracefully. Life with Jack had been orderly and clean. When he had a painting chore, the paint was applied only to the intended surfaces. It never ended up on him or his clothes, a feat I found impossible. When I was painting the closet one day, Sportster found his way into my workspace. I was covered in paint, and dared not grab him, or he would also be covered from paw to tail. I was forced to allow him to wander through the closet. He inspected my job and meandered out again without a speck of paint touching his pristine fur. I was now a believer in this phenomenon of reincarnation, since this feline had graced my life without my invitation, never making a mess and allowing me to admire him only at a distance. So Sportster was now on board too, along with Jack Incarnate, both ready for the adventures ahead. Sportster was perched unconcerned on the dash. Jack Incarnate had his wide-eyed navigator's stare, and I watched the landscape drift by. My home and friends, along with the miles, were disappearing in the rearview mirror. There were no holds on me now, no one to answer to. I was running wild and free. I was running away from home, just like I had when I was 8.